For this episode of Chats with Changemakers, I chatted with Wes Bush, best-selling author of Product-Led Growth, How to Build a Product That Sells Itself, and CEO of Product-Led. Needless to say, Wes knows a thing or two about Product-Led Growth, or PLG. His love for showing, not telling, was first sparked at Vidyard, and since then he's guided many companies in setting up a successful PLG motion. We chatted about what PLG really is and who it's for, and how product-led differs from sales-led, identifying your ideal user profile, and last but not least, what the future holds. Enjoy the episode. Wes, thank you so much for joining me. I guess most people on my LinkedIn also know you because you're quite present, but I wanted to anyhow ask you to reintroduce yourself.
I always struggle with introductions, but I think for myself, I'm obsessed with product-led growth. So like that's really got me into this whole field. Like I was working at like sales-led companies, doing like demand gen, getting more leads for the sales team. And what always was like the question itching in my back of my head was like, is there a better way to do this? And then it wasn't until we launched this free trial and then a freemium model at a company called Vidyard in 2016 that I was like, oh my goodness, why were we doing the old model? We got to see like very quickly, like the first time actually bombed. The second time actually really, really worked really well. We got like 100,000 users very quickly, but it was like, wow, there's this new way of just showing people the value of the product. And it kind of had that like big aha moment for me. And I've just been like, okay, how can we do that better? How can we implement this in more companies? So everything like I kind of describe and we'll chat about here, it really does come from like the place of like, I'm curious, I'm passionate about this topic. And yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
Yeah. And I think you're pretty much an expert, right? Because you've read the book, basically. I was just thinking, oh, let me learn about this topic. And your book was like the first that popped up. That's why I read it. And I guess you have been implementing it, right? You have been doing this for clients.
Totally. I still feel like a student. There's always a lot I can learn.
I mean, it's so new, right? It's funny because I'm quite active on LinkedIn now. And I see PLG all over my feed, right? It's like PLG this, PLG that, experimentation, growth hacking, product-led growth, all over the place. And then I read these books and it all sounds amazing and great. But then when I take it to practice, so I'm in Berlin, Germany, and when I start talking to founders about it, it's a very different world, right? The reality is very different from the theory that we see. And the most common response that I get when I mention product-led growth, people are like, what are you talking about? And then I describe it and I get, you mean the free trial? Yeah, we have a free trial.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to ask you, what is the biggest misconception that's out there about PLG?
Yeah. So I love that you start with that because whenever I kind of do presentations around like, what is product-led growth? I usually I use this one tweet that somebody had, which is like, I don't know if it's okay to swear, but it's like product-led growth. It's just like an effing trial. And it's like, okay, great. I think this sums up a lot of like the resistance around what this is. But I think that is like in that sentence, it's like that withholds the misconception, which is like a lot of people think it's just slapping on a free trial or a freemium model or something like that. But if you kind of unpack it, the way I kind of look at just doing business in general, there's kind of like four main components to it. There's like, okay, you got to acquire people got to learn about what you do. You got to get users to your site, signing up for something. And then the next step is like, okay, we got to monetize them. So we got to really figure out like what's right for them. What are they going to pay for? And then the next step is like engage. How do we actually get them to value? How do we deliver that value? And then the last one is just like expansion. Like how do we grow this value and everything else? So the fundamentals haven't changed in this whole kind of like, we're not creating something revolutionary here, but the evolution of going from like a sales-led company to more of a product-led company is really just the nuance of like, what is the order of these items? If we look at a sales-led company, very common is like we acquire the person, they come to our site, they sign up for a demo, boom, they go straight into the monetization kind of process. And then once you become a customer, you get lucky enough to actually get value, hopefully, within the product, and you get to engage, and then they're going to try and expand you, grow you as a customer. That's normal. But like in a product-led company, the nuance here is you have to go from acquire to engage first. So it's all about giving value first, delivering value. If you have a very bad value exchange or don't give much value, don't expect it to work. And then once you get to users to value, it's all about the monetization and then expansion. So like that's the nuance. And I the first time I mentioned in the intro, like we launched a free trial at Vidyard and it didn't work. It was because we didn't understand that simple concept where it was like, okay, we have a sales team. We gotta get like our quota or leads and all that stuff. That the processes did not change, but we had this free trial thing. We're like, what's going on here? And it was basically just like, okay, we have a free trial. You can sign up for it, but there was no thought to like, let's get users to actually value. And then we're like left scratching our heads, like, why didn't this work? And it seems so like simple in hindsight, but that's the biggest misconception. It's not just the model. It's like, you got to actually deliver value first.
Yeah, but I think that is a huge one because, and this is what I keep telling people, it requires a complete organizational shift, right? So your whole company needs to buy into it. I keep getting back, yeah, but we have a product owner and he'll just do the walkthrough. We can do a checklist, right? We'll just build it into the products. But it's a whole organizational shift, right? Like marketing, sales, leadership, everyone needs to be facing in the same direction. And in the end, it's about figuring out who you're serving and understanding how you can deliver value to them. It's just with product-led, you feel it maybe even quicker if you didn't get it right. But the principles must be the same.
Yeah. And I think like to add on to that too, like it is like one simple shift, like, okay, just like prioritizing engagement before monetization. But culturally, it's like, as far as the business goes, it's like, what do you set as the priority? And so it does come down to that part of like, okay, we need to prioritize this over monetization, which seems kind of weird. We got to serve before we sell. And then that's like a cultural kind of shift. And then you think about like from a strategy perspective too, it's like, well, your strategy hopefully will change in some ways. It's like, what's your approach of like how you're going to win in your market? And it's like, well, delivering value first. Like we're going to have the best experience. We're going to help our users win first before they even think about like upgrading and stuff like that too. So it is totally like on that point that you mentioned, it's like, it's a company level strategy. And I think a lot of people think about this as like, it's just a product thing. Like, just forget it. Like, it's a free trial. It's simple. And then as some companies go into it, they start realizing like, whoa, there's a lot more to this iceberg as they kind of hit it.
Right. Most of them will do what you did and what I've done in the past. I'm guilty of it too. Slap on a free trial. How long should it be? Well, everyone's doing 14 days. Let's make it 14 days. There. What's happening in those 40 days? I don't know. Let's just show them some features and whatever. And it failed, right? And then our decision making, and I am very ashamed of this, was, okay, free trials don't work. Boom, back to sales led, right? Yeah. It's already a pretty intelligent organization that understands, hey, maybe it's us. Maybe we didn't quite do it right. And maybe we should experiment with it or try something else. Most organizations don't get there, I'm afraid.
Totally.
One thing that I really like about PLG is also this idea we need to focus on a specific target audience, right? The problem that I've seen with companies is that they find it very hard to identify their audience. But now I see all of these AI tools and no-code tools that are super powerful that seem to not be narrow at all. Like if you look at ChatGPT, like everyone, Make or Zapier is like connect stuff, automate things, right? It's extremely broad. And I find that very interesting because it kind of conflicts with everything I believe in. And I was wondering if you can comment on that. Like, how do you see that? Why does that work all of a sudden?
And for like every one of those like super popular kind of apps that you see, it's like, well, what was it like 5 years ago or like 7 years ago, like but when they were really like early on to what they were trying to do. And this is one of those other shifts that kind of aligns with like when you have monetization first as a sales company, your focus is like ideal customer profile. So like you're mapping towards that. When you're focusing on like engagement, it's actually like, what's your ideal user profile? And it's not always the buyer. So it can be in like team environments. It can be somebody completely different kind of thing. And so it's like, well, actually they work there. They're the ones doing the work. And then they're going to like knock on their boss's door, be like, I love this software. Can we purchase it? They're like, great. Here's the company credit card or whatever. There is that distinction too of like who you market to is different. And so back to that example, like, okay, ChatGPT and all these other like super popular applications that are developed for like anybody can use it. If you really break down early days, most of those, like I call them horizontal applications where it's like anybody could use it and get some sort of value out of it. It really does start with like in the early days, who is that ideal user profile? Who is that person? So ChatGPT probably has several of them where they're like, hey, there's, you know, people who are doing hardcore research. There's like some of the developers, there's some of the like marketers or something like that. So they'll have actual like, these are the prompts. We're going to write content about this to kind of like showcase some of these use cases, because with any product like this, there's like the beginner level of like, okay, if you want to see like okay value, treat me like Google. And people are like, what's this? They're like, oh, it's just a faster way to Google. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, well, actually, if you go down more the intermediate rabbit hole, you start learning some of the use cases. You're like, whoa, you could do that too. Like example, write a LinkedIn post like this on this topic. It's like, it can do it, but then like write it like it's funny, or like write it like it's like Adam Sandler or something like that. It's like, it can do a lot of that other stuff, but like, how do you know what you don't know kind of thing? And so that's really, I think for a lot of those products, they do still have those user profiles, but it does kind of evolve as far as as they build it out. So it does appear like it's for everybody, and that's their goal. Like they want to democratize it so like anybody can use it, but it always does start with like several of these user profiles, and then they kind of add on more as time goes on.
Yeah. So there's always this discussion I'm having about going broad, then going narrow, or going narrow earlier on. And my understanding from PLG was that it was about going narrow earlier on because you want to give them this straight line to success somehow. And it's just very hard to do.
Yeah. And I think it's like, what are some of those, like finding those early ones that's the hardest part of like this whole thing. It's like, who are those users who are going to be set up for success the most? And like one of the ways that I always like to think about it is I tie like way too much of my stuff to this one researcher, which his name's BJ Fogg, but he created like this behavior model. And so like whenever it comes to identifying like who's your ideal user and what does that look like, I just tied to the three variables there. It's like, so if for anybody who's listening, there's basically this graph, and there's like one scale is like motivation, the other one's ability, and then the final kind of line is like how many prompts do they need to get to this target behavior. And so the theory is if you have high motivation, high ability, it's easy for you to do, and you have like some sort of prompts that are like reminders of like, hey, like some of them could be internal, some of them can just be external. And you're going to hit that target behavior very easily. So it's like, when you think about those users, who is going to win? And you think about it, like who's highly motivated. So like somebody like at the bleeding edge of tech is going to be like, hell yeah, like give me that chat tool. I want to see it. They're like the early adopters. They're like, I love this. Give it to me. And then they're maybe like in tech or something like that. This is easy for them. It's like Google. Oh, great. Like I'm going to like abuse this tool and see what is possible to do with it. And then it's like the prompts, they actually have the best ones. The best prompts anybody could have are like internal, which is like, you think about checking like Facebook or Messenger or something like that. It's all internal. It's like, oh, I want to stay connected. Okay, great. It's not a notification anymore. It's like we're addicted to that prompt. And so it's like, if you structure and pick your users based on those three variables, you're going to be able to find who are those people who are going to be most sticky. Now, I'll give you an example of someone who's on the far end of the spectrum. Maybe it's like doctors or it's like dentists. It's like they're smart people, but like they don't really have much motivation for this or like use cases for it of like, hey, I'm doing this and I just do dentist stuff every single day. So like there's less use cases, less motivation, less prompts, less people are talking about it in their circles. And so nothing against dentists, but there's just not that ideal user profile for them.
Do you think there's a role ever for PLG to targeting enterprise clients? Will it always just be early adopters, or can we go beyond that?
Oh, you can totally go beyond that. I was reading this book. You would probably like it. It's called Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution. And in it, he has this graph, which I think he ripped it off of Crossing the Chasm, but he had a different context behind it, which I'll share. So like in Crossing the Chasm, there's, your early adopters, then there's like your early majority. And in between those two gaps, there's like this like sucky place to be as a business, which is the chasm. This is where it's like, it's the desert, it's the plateau. It's like, as you're trying to figure out like, hey, we've like tapped out the early adopters. Now we need to like find out, okay, who are those early majority and late majority kind of folks? And it's different. And so in that book, the thing I loved about it was he kind of made this statement or argument where it's like product market fit isn't something that's like one and done. And I think a lot of people think it's one and done. It's like you can hit product market fit with the early adopters because they're just like, I love your product. It does not have everything I need, but I love it. It's so new. And then like a lot of companies will like fall into this chasm if they don't develop the whole product solution. And so it's like, to get to the next level, you need to actually develop like, what is the complete solution for this look like? And then that's where it starts to get a bit more sticky because those people are a lot more resistant to trying new things. To get to the enterprise, you will need that. And then you will need more time in that space for them to start considering you because they just don't really want to roll out a full solution enterprise-wide. For most enterprises, if it's just a startup where they're like, hey, you might go out of business pretty soon. So we don't want to be the only option here. If this is like a core piece of how we go to market, that's something they don't want to play around with too much.
So is it like that the PLG motion is really helpful when you're launching in a sense? So you can get these early adopters, you can fill that base quickly. What I also love about it so much is that it's about word of mouth, right?
Yeah. And one of the distinctions too, when it comes to like some of the differences between like finding product market fit with like a product-led company versus more of a sales-led company. If you look at like acquire, monetize, and then the engage part for a sales-led company, it's like PMF is usually like, oh, great, we have great sales. And then we're going to start looking at like, is this sticky? Whereas a product-led company is like, okay, we acquired signups. Is there like engagement? Is there retention? Are people coming back to this? If not, then you're going to have a very hard time finding product market fit because it's just like, well, people aren't using it. And so the game here for PMF is really, it's about value creation before value capture. And so that's really the huge kind of hurdle a lot of product-led companies have. But the cool thing is if you do solve for value creation first, it puts you up in a great place where it's like, okay, now we can figure out monetization. We can like streamline this. And I've seen a lot of companies where it's like early stages, they just have like, maybe it starts off completely free. They just want to see like, what are people using in this product? And then they throw up some like crazy low price point. Like, is this like something people want to pay for? And then they kind of grow and like organize their monetization structure a bit more. So yeah, that's kind of the high level process of like how some companies can approach it. But it obviously depends a lot on like your funding. If you're funded or if you're bootstrapped, it's totally different.
But then also in that way of thinking, I think PLG or this free trial, freemium stuff was very exciting, especially in the beginning when it was new. Mm-hmm. But I feel right now it's kind of the status quo or kind of the norm. So as that is the case, it gets harder again to cut through the noise, right? Because this PLG motion was a great way to stand out and to be like, look at us, we're doing it differently. Yeah, now it's what everybody's doing. And I feel the same way about the emails that you get because always comes with this set of emails, which you call conversational bumpers in your book, which I quite like. So I just wonder, considering that, what's next for PLG, right? Like how can companies, again, cut through that noise and deliver something special?
Yeah, so I think if you're relying on emails, like as part of like your onboarding strategy, like it's a weak way to kind of like build a business. Ideally, it's in a perfect world for like any product that comes. It's like you go in, you get to Valley in like that first visit, and then you're like off to the races. At the end of the day, like all these software tools, it's just enabling you to have a new capability. So it's like, oh, cool, Canva, I can like design something that I couldn't do before. It's like, I'm now more capable. Great. So yeah, any tools about that, same end goal, but it's like, how do you get there faster? And so I think that's like the level one of where the market's going to be at, like how to win in the next like 1 or 2 years. Like if every company is going to become product led, it's like that's going to be the way where it's like, okay, there's like 10 or 100 solutions for like design. Okay, I'm going to pick the one with like the fastest kind of experience. Is going to be great. But what I also think, like looking forward, even past that, is it's going to be really about free monopolies. And you're looking at like, we are already a part of a lot of free monopolies. Like what we're recording this on, Google Meet, is provided for most people free. And it's amazing, like the capabilities of like everything you can get for this. And then you think about, oh yeah, my Gmail's free too. Oh yeah, Google, like it's the same thing, but it's just going to be like, we're going to find a lot more companies where they're like, actually, our ideal user profiles, they struggle with these problems before they get to these problems. They have more beginner problems. And so they're going to start looking at like, well, actually, maybe we just purchase that SaaS solution that does this. And then we don't even worry about monetization. Or maybe we just build this out, tackle some more of those problems and attract even more people who are earlier on. So I think like finding a lot of companies with multi-product strategies and actually just going into industries where they say, actually, we don't care about monetization because we monetize in this other way. And that's actually going to be amazing for the consumers. As businesses go, it's going to get a bit harder to compete against free. And so I really do see it as like, it's going to be the best thing ever. People are going to be like, oh, great. There's these like free tools all the time. But I think it's going to be like the only way a business can do that sustainably is through like a free monopoly.
And this is really hard, right? I see exactly. It's such an opportunity for businesses, especially early stage startups, to embrace this movement and show rather than tell. But it's also a huge threat, as you see, like as you say. I actually recently spoke to multiple companies who told me we're going to have to do a freemium, because otherwise it's just right to play. We cannot enter the field if we don't have a freemium. But then when they talk to me about how they're going to do the freemium, there's very little knowledge about, right, like what makes sense and what they're going to achieve with it, because it's not their free choice. It's because they're forced to do it somehow, because the market has forced them into it. How can they survive? Do they all need to become experts in PLG?
In the book, I had this one quadrant where it was like, there's 4 different places you can play as a business. There's like the differentiated play, which means like you're going to do something better. You can also charge more for that. And then there's like the dominant kind of space where it's like, hey, like this is, if you are going to be like the biggest, have the best product at the best price, very hard to stay in that zone. And then there's more like the disruptive play, which is like, it was Canva versus Photoshop at the early days. It's like, hey, we're not as capable, but like eventually now it's like, well, actually Canva is probably more dominant because it's like, well, most people don't need to know much about design to make social media graphics. Hello. And so those are kind of like the 3 main ones. The last one's kind of like the garbage strategy. Get the job done worse, charge more. You'll find that in airports. A lot of other places are like, that much for water? Give me a break. So what I kind of like to add on to that for the differentiated play, I do see like a lot more companies, even in that space, becoming product-led. But that's actually the easier place where I see a lot more potential too. It's like there's going to be the free monopolies in the dominant space where they're like, if you're going to play and compete at that level, it's like one of the only ways you could do it. And then it's going to be the differentiated play is going to be disrupted even more, because like that's where a lot of the sales-led companies were like playing out and kind of hiding these like, hey, we can make a more complex product, solve a lot more of these complex problems. But then now it's going to be like, it's the CRM for the real estate agents doing over $1 million or something like that. It's like very specific. And there's a lot of creators and SaaS tools that can do that specifically for those people. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. But I see that differentiated play to also get a lot harder to compete there too.
Exactly, because I am always a fan of the differentiated play, because I think it's almost the only thing that works if you don't have super deep pockets.
Totally.
Because I think like it doesn't make sense to go for a dominant play and try to create something better than the market leader for cheaper, or better. It's just or slightly worse but cheaper, where you just kind of target the market leader head on. I mean, if you're bootstrapping or something, or have less than a couple 100 million in your pocket, it's really a difficult strategy. But does that one work with freemium though? Because my understanding is always that freemium, you need like a huge total addressable market. And that's the kind of thing you exactly don't have when you go niche, right? Like, if you are addressing railway stations who need XYZ and value sustainability or whatever, right? You go like super niche, maybe there's 30 of them. And what if they all use your freemium model happily? Then you've kind of burned your entire market.
Yeah, I think there's definitely different scales of like what people define as like differentiated and how big it is. Like if it's 30 people, please don't. Just talk to them, meet them all in person or something. Like there's a lot of ways to do that. But then if it's, like you're looking at a market of like, okay, there's like maybe 1 million or potential like people in this area. It's like, that's still like deep enough for like some people where it's like, hey, we're going to like get to know everyone. We're going to be able to like own this particular space. And that's fine. And like what I've seen a lot of companies do is like they get really narrow at the early days. They focus on that like core market. And then what they realize is like, okay, we really serve this one market so well. What are the next extensions? So it's like, okay, we focus on real estate agents. Now we're going to go to brokers or something like that. It's like, it's pretty much the same thing, but there's a lot of like nuances and differences as far as how they manage their business and stuff like that. So that's really like where you would start. And then eventually maybe it is like a dominant business once you have a bunch of these different profiles.
I think it's the same thing as the ICP definition, the beachhead strategy. It all goes to the same thing. Pick someone to focus on and then grow bigger from there. The way I see it with target audience definition, it's usually broad-ish early stage, then narrower, and then broader again.
That's an important like distinction, because I think if companies go too specific too early on, then it's also like to their detriment, because you're like, oh, like maybe you had this hypothesis of like, this person is that. And like, I can tell you it's probably like going to be different sometimes. Like we are just starting to do a lot more like user research on like our entire business, and like it's more automated now. And I'm like, I had these hunches and I'm like, I'm so wrong. And it's like, I love it, because I was like, just totally out of line in that sense. But it's like, you just don't know what you don't know until you actually test it out.
Yeah. And that's the mindset shift, right? Because I also wanted to ask you, what is the biggest enemy of product-led growth? And for me, I think it's that mindset shift, right? About maybe being willing to be proven wrong, because that's the thing that I see the most often. The founders don't really want to learn, if they're completely honest.
Yeah. And I think like part of that mindset too is like, I forget, somebody has a better quote summarizing this, so I'll botch it, but it's like, hold your like opinions, like fight for them and everything else like that. But as soon as you have like more data or something, just like move in that direction. Don't let the ego kind of like get in the way of like, oh yeah, I got to like defend this because I need to be right. At the end of the day, like make the customer right, and like you're going to do well in business, and figure out like what are some of those ways to serve them better.
I wanted to ask you, what is the biggest mistake that you've made, maybe in this field or in general in terms of growth?
Yeah, I think that lesson that I started off with, like, okay, there's acquire, monetize, and then it's engage, and then the switch to like, actually it's acquisition, engagement, and then monetization. That's the hardest part of this whole thing. It is really changing the way you think about it. It's totally like, you can summarize it as serve before you sell, or my famous one line is like, your user success will eventually become your success. If you kind of operationalize that, you're going to go off to the races. But it is very hard, especially being at the top of the business, where you look at like the P&L and you're like, oh, wow, this might mean actually we take a big hit. And then it's like, well, okay, this might hurt for the next like 3 months or 4 months if this doesn't work, kind of thing. So that's one of the big mistakes, is just like really believing that this will work, but then also having the follow through, like how you help the user see value. Because like if you don't get that part, if you don't solve that early enough, it's just going to not work. And it's like, what percentage of the users who signed up for the free thing actually got the value? And like getting specific about that, I think that's one of the other like common mistakes and big mistakes I made too, where it's like, we weren't clear on what that was. What was that like big moment of like value for that free user? And then did we do everything we thought was possible to get them to that point? And I'm not just talking product. I'm talking like, okay, content wise, they didn't know like that this was important. Oh, we need to help them do that. Like, I'll tell you an example, even for our business, like when it comes to building a self-serve model that it actually has a chance of like winning and getting the user to value and also paying for it. Just yes, bing, 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 business objective. The big thing there is like, okay, we really need to get super specific on like, what is that value? And for us, it was like, we started to realize, hey, people are going into this program and they don't know that this is a team thing. And so we were like, oh no, this is a beginner problem before they get to this problem. So we need to solve that first. And so once you start to kind of build this culture, that you start to realize like, wow, okay, great. Like we need to solve this problem before this problem. And like, it's not always going to work out that way. And it most likely won't. But it's just, how do you train your team to think about like, okay, let's unblock these people, because if they go into this at this stage, they're going to understand like how to build this thing out. But then it's just going to be one person. They're not going to get buy-in. They're like, bring those people along and it's going to be way easier, like 10 times easier. So that's kind of the big mistake, is like drive them towards something, but also unblock them with all those other challenges.
Yeah, super interesting. All the stuff you said, it reminds me a little bit about jobs to be done, right? Like mapping the whole path. And I also like what you said about, because I've said it a few times now, oh yeah, you just bring the user to value. You need to create a straight line to value, and then he will experience the value. 90% of early stage startups that I've worked with and for, we don't really know the value, if we're completely honest, right? Because also we were scared of zeroing in on one target audience. If you ask companies what is their core value proposition, you will get this in most cases. You will get a 5-minute description of all the stuff that the thing can do, which is a huge problem to begin with, right? It's not clear. And then in other cases, I have companies who are very clear on their value, but it's the value that they think, that they imagine in their head what the value should be. And that's not the point, right? The whole point is what is the value in your user's eyes? And that's why I really like this product market fit audit that Sean Ellis proposed, his book, Hacking Growth, where it's about, if you have a user base of at least 40 recurring users who use your product recently, you can ask them, what is the value to them, right? And learn it from your actual customer base. So that's something I would recommend everyone to do. But I don't know many companies who actually do that. And that's kind of the first hurdle to driving people to value, if you don't know what your value is at all.
Yeah. And that's such a good point too, because like on the acquire side of the business, the big piece there is like your value prop. And if you're targeting like early adopters, it's going to be one kind of like value prop. And then if you're targeting like the early majority and you've actually gone through it and you built out the whole product solution, it's a different value prop. And so it seems like something subtle, but like the big change here is it's like, well, you actually have to deliver on that thing. So it's like, how do we do that within the product? And it's not always like, I'll tell, even for our business, it's like, our kind of like main overarching goal is like, we want to help you build a successful product-led business. But like, that's really big and like a meaty kind of thing to get towards. And it's going to take like a long time, but like, let's like break it down. Do you know what I talk about when I say like, those are like Russian dolls? They're like, one fits into the other and another. It's like, think about that as like the way you build out value. It's like, you might start off with like your big value prop is like the big one initially, and then you gotta like unpack it. And you find out, okay, great. We got to like the smallest little doll here. And okay, this is what we're going to deliver on. initially. And so it's a subset of that. It's something that will give people momentum to say, oh, great, this is in the right direction of like getting towards that big value prop. And for some other companies too, that are like doing simple kind of solutions, it can be just like, maybe there's like $2. Some other companies have like 20. You're like, well, man, there's so many different unpacking to do here. But it really depends on like, what is the total value prop and how meaty is it to get there, kind of thing.
It's such an important story to tell. I'm so glad that I see this now on LinkedIn, that there's people telling stories about how often they change the value prop, right? It's a lot of iteration, and value propositions do change. As you say, as you test and learn, as you change your target audience, as you change from maturity stage, as you address different target audience segments, as you maybe launch new markets, new products, it's a consistent change. So I think it's really healthy to talk about that a bit more, and kind of kill that misconception.
Yeah. And when you have like different ideal user profiles, there's going to be like multiple ones. And then it's like, if you have multiple products, there's like the intersection of all those two. So it's like you have like 3 or 4 different ideal user profiles. And if you have like 3 different products, there's a ton of different combinations within there. So it's like, okay, how do we get each of you to the value moment? And that's really where like complexity comes. But it's like, how do we get that user that wants to use the accounting software to this particular outcome of like, what is that mini outcome? So it's like, for most product-led companies, this is why if you start this in the early days, it's way easier, because you're going to be able to use it. You're going to be able to see how it works on a single product solution. And then you're going to master that skill to be like, okay, eventually when we think about like, maybe we hit the 10 mil mark and we're like, okay, we need to like expand, grow and expand that value for each customer. It's like, then we can add some of these other bigger products in, but it's much harder to do it the other way. Where you're like, we're a sales-led business. We have 5 products and then we want to be product-led. You're just left scratching your head.
Actually, because when we talk about this, it's clear that it's a lot of work, right? It's like constant work. And I think one of the issue is that it's not clear who should really own that work. Is it the CEO? Is it product? Is it marketing? Is it something else?
This one largely dependent on one, like the obvious skill set of the founder, but or how many founders you have too. But earlier stage companies, it has to almost always be a founder that will run this, because it impacts all the different departments. So if it's like it's one person, they're not going to have necessarily the same authority or like ways to make some of these big risks. And that's the big thing here too. If this is like a new strategy you're rolling out, there is going to be a lot of risk, and you want someone who actually has a little bit of an appetite for some risk. They're not going to get it necessarily the first time or the second time, so they got to be okay, like kind of sweating, like, I don't know if this is actually going to work. It's like, it's okay. It's part of the process. And then if it's a bigger company, this is really interesting. We've seen like anywhere from like the chief like product officer kind of like taking point on this. That's pretty great to kind of see. And then usually what they'll end up doing is hiring maybe like a growth product manager or somebody under them to kind of like actually do a ton of the execution for this at a bigger size company. For like mid-size, it might just be that like growth product manager or head of growth or head of product that's like actually taking the lead on this. It matters less about like who's leading this. What matters is that this is actually a leader. Forget about the title. This is a role where they need a ton of like soft power leadership skills to get a cross collaborative team off the ground, because it's not just like product's initiative. It's like, yeah, although product might own it and be the best person to kind of like understand like how this could be rolled out across the entire company, they need to involve marketing, they need to involve sales, they need to involve engineering, they need to involve like the leadership team and all this other stuff as far as like how this works. And so I would emphasize more on the like soft skill part than like, okay, do we have the right person with the right title? And I think one of the points like you pointed out earlier that is really important to screen for this person is that mindset. Like, do they embody these core values? Like, do they get it? And if they're the ones thinking like, hey, let's just roll out this free trial, it's like, you have the wrong person, kind of thing to kind of lead this. And maybe that's like just the early stage. Maybe they have everything else. They just don't know a lot of stuff. So I think in that case, it's like, give them the time to like really, really research this, understand it, so they can like go beyond like that initial like, oh yeah, it's just this, to be like, oh wow, it's this whole organization thing.
Yeah. And it's great that there's people like you who are kind of spreading the word on what it can be and writing great books about it.
Well, the goal is really just like every book I write, I want to make it free. So democratizing exactly how to do this. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it really does. It really helped me a lot.
Awesome.
So I'm realizing we're almost at time. So I just want to ask you one last question. My listeners are mostly leaders of startups and scale-ups. Some of them have heard of PLG. Some of them kind of know what it is. What is the most eye-opening learning that you would want to give to them?
Most eye-opening learning. Oh boy, there's so many. I'm going to be the old record here and repeat something, which is, if you take away nothing else, it's this: your user success will ultimately become your success. And it's really a simple concept, but it's very hard to execute. And thinking about like what we were talking about earlier about your value prop, nailing that, and then actually delivering on that in the engagement process. And then you can figure out the monetization side of things. There is an order to this. And if you really lean into like uncovering like, okay, the value prop, and then, okay, how do we deliver it? And then you get super granular on like understanding the user is like, what are the problems that get in the way of this? You start to realize it's not just the product stuff. Sometimes it's just, maybe it's their own mindset. They don't understand all these other things that go into it. And they need to be trained. They need some help on this stuff. And so I think the organizations that I'm like super excited for that really embrace PLG, they start to have like onboarding coaches. They start to have like, how do we embody everybody on the company to really prioritize user success, measure it, track it, all that fun stuff, and make it a way of just how you do business. Because I think serving before you sell and trying before you buy is, yeah, becoming, like you said, table stakes. But I think it's also the right way to do business. It really de-risks the buyer and puts them first.
I completely agree. And I think, as I said, it is table stakes, but on the other hand, there's so much to be improved in terms of customer service. I'm sometimes really shocked by the low level of customer service, even of like early stage startups, where I imagine I'm one of the first 500 customers. And I'm like, really? That's it? Like no personal, like a link to the FAQ? Guys, like a bit more effort, please, right? So I think there's...
Sound me.
Go on, I'm here. I'm writing you. Come on. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of this and your time. And I hope we'll speak soon in the future. And as soon as a book is ready, then please let me know so I can post it all over the place.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Thank you. Speak soon.
All right. Bye.